you everyone for joining us this evening. I heard through the grapevine that some of you wanted to reach out and speak with the V9 team, so I reached out and they graciously, I know time difference is horrible because they're up here in Alaska and under several feet of snow, and I appreciate you all coming out to join us and give us some kind of a bigger idea of what's going on with V9. So I figured we could start out here quickly. If you guys could introduce yourselves, tell us where you're from, which kingdom you're residents of, and why did you guys decide, my first question is, why did you guys decide to be a part of this team?
Would you like us to choose our order, or do you want to just point to one of us and say go?
How about you, since you're the lead, how about you start?
All right, cool. My name is Wunjo. I am from the Kingdom of the Nine Blades, freshly minted as such. I guess it's been almost a year now, but I am the director of the V9 team. I've been playing for about 19 years now, and I got on the V9 team through its origins. So we originally there was two separate teams about 2 years ago that were kind of independently planning V9. And I was on one of those independent teams as kind of like a representative of the then Principality of the Nine Blades. And when we eventually got to that year's GOTC for the Inter-Kingdom Circle of Monarchs meeting, those two teams were basically fused into one team. A bunch of people were cut to have a more core central group, and over the couple years that evolved into what it is right now, with me eventually taking up the lead position. And I'll let the other two kind of explain how they came about. Gorvan, you want to go? You're the next.
Yeah. So I was also a member of that group. I was the Goldenville rep, as Goldenville's rules rep, and still am. I've worked with Delhi as rules rep in the past, but yeah, I was one of the few people that stuck around from the first V9 team through the merger.
I guess that leaves me. I'm Heron. I play in Northern Lights, which is not terribly far. It's only 8 here. It was pretty late for these other two. I actually joined the team pretty recently, just a couple months ago. Gosh, about 3 months. And I was participating in some of the focus groups, and I kept being added to them. I think by the time they invited me to join, I'd made it into all of them. So, like, why don't we just invite Heron? And now I'm here, I guess.
That is awesome. Well, yes, you're not. Yes, you're very close to us as being in Northern Lights, a stone's throw away. But thank you guys again for showing up here. So for Northreach, we're in general chat, so you also have access to be able to unmute yourself and throw out your questions. If you do not want to actually speak, I turned the CFC BOD meeting into the V9 chat. So if you go down a little bit, you should see the chat there. So does anyone have any burning questions? I know, Ad, you're dying to ask a question. He's even listening. I see him on.
I'm seeing monks plus arrows equals happy day.
Yeah, sorry, it's probably pretty loud right now. I'm in a welding class. So I'm a very high advocate that monks should be able to catch arrows with the caveat that they have replacement arrows.
House looks so good.
Sorry, I missed that last part. Was that a question or just a statement?
So what would it take in order for monks to be able to, or is it just plainly too dangerous?
To catch arrows? So I guess this is a good time for me to give the big disclaimer. Disclaimer! Literally everything we say here today in answering your questions, except for obviously our, backstory, is subject to change. We are still doing surveys. We still have focus groups going on. There is still years of development left. So while we may make some observations about current data trends, nothing is guaranteed until it is put in the final book and voted on in 2024 or later. So just please remember that as you go. If we say something here, it will help us a lot if you try not to infer too much from those statements, especially if it ends up spreading around and then like one bit of leaked information comes this way and another bit comes that way, and like they're from two different angles, two different topics, two different time periods, and then people end up having this vision of V9 in their head that might be completely strange and people start panicking. We want to kind of curb that. We know people love theory crafting and taking in the leaks and spoilers and all the stuff that's coming out, but just as a general thing, keep in the back of your head, everything is subject to change, and we are going to be working to make sure everything fits together smoothly. So if things become an issue, if we say something, that can change. I think I rambled a bit there, but to answer your question, in regards to monks being able to catch arrows, like physically grab them, the general observation is that people don't want others touching their stuff. And especially in the way that catching an arrow typically requires, it is currently does not seem to be in favor of that changing anytime soon. Does that answer your question?
Sad bug noises.
I would say he's probably
Sure, are you okay?
crying deep inside from that answer.
It's one of those things where, like, I know that it comes up a lot of the time where it's like, oh, well, what if the archer that's shooting me is cool with it? And that comes down to local level things and how Reeves and stuff want to do it. But as a general rule of thumb, safety is like up here. Like, I can't reach high enough to tell you how high safety is when it comes to what we want to do with V9. And just, there are arrows already one of the most dangerous things in this game. The fact that we are allowed to have an archery system, is a huge privilege. And any bits that interact with that could make the arrows, that could compromise the arrows in some way that the archer cannot control, just makes it more and more pushes the potential hazards into the unsafe zone, and catching arrows is one of those things. Same with like sharing arrows. I know a lot of parks do that, and we've had a lot of people in our surveys mention how they don't think that should be allowed, even though currently it's not allowed. So I hope that kind of encapsulates the idea about arrows. I know monks like arrow missile block. I know you guys love that. So, but yeah.
All right, sorry, Ad, sounds like you might be SLL. Anyone else have a burning desire question before I start going into my pocket questions?
Adge, I'll just follow up on what he's saying in chat. He's saying same thing happens when you block it or put your hand in front, it can deflect and hit someone in the eye. Yes, our current arrow construction and arrow combat and all that team, like, those are big issues. So that's not necessarily a, well, it happens, therefore other rule. We're actually trying to solve that one too. Because, like I mentioned, arrows are dangerous. Arrows are very, very dangerous. And currently, it's kind of like we're riding on luck and we're riding on hope. But really, it shouldn't be, because the people who have been injured by arrows probably have some of the most serious injuries when it comes to Amtgard outside of freak accidents, right? Like someone just falling down. Okay, next question.
Karina asked, is there a possibility that assassin can, instead of whole person at 4th level, get a single poison arrow?
I can take this one. So the short answer is it's possible. The longer answer is that we haven't really started designing classes yet. So we're looking at a lot of different ways that classes can be customized, and looking at all the things that classes need. We'll be doing surveys on those to figure out where they're at the moment, and then we'll be kind of going from there. So it's definitely possible that that's something that assassins can do in the future. Whether it is totally undetermined. So it might happen, but it's equally likely that it doesn't. We're just kind of not there yet.
So I'm gonna go ahead, Deli.
As like a more general question, like currently our rulebook's like 95% like battle games. I was curious if you guys are deeping into like if you're gonna have some sort of codified like questing or maybe like ditching rules or like even like tournament play or like a dungeon master guide type book, or like what are you guys thinking generally for V9?
So, so I can answer that with two statements. So the first statement is, we definitely want to make sure that the V9 rulebook doesn't appear to favor one aspect of Amtgard over another. Now we have the issue where the battle game, like the full class rules, are just more, and that's why it seems that way. But I don't know how it is, up where you guys are, but sometimes when we talk about Amtgard and we say, hey, we're talking about the game, some people are referring to playing on a field, and some people think of the game of Amtgard as the whole community experience, including like ANS crafting, tournaments, government, autocrating, running events, all that stuff. And so one of the things we want to do in V9 is make sure that we're acknowledging all the different aspects that go into the Amtgard experience as things that you can do. You can join Amtgard and just be, what are you going to do? You're going to be government forever and never touch ditching or full class or quests or roleplay or crafting? Cool. That is one of the pillars of Amtgard, rather than being like battle games like full class is Amtgard and then everything else is just meant to support it, which I think most of you can agree is not, but that's the way it's being portrayed sometimes. The other statement for your question about something like a Dungeon Master's Guide is currently a lot of data and requests and just our own personal feelings tends to suggest that yes, we will want to be looking into some sort of essentially Dungeon Master's Guide to keep the bloat in the original rulebook low, while also giving a support book for people who want to build stuff, run stuff, and support the game behind the scenes, but that a regular player does not necessarily need to absorb in order to benefit from it. Does that answer your question?
The first part, not so much. So you said you want to make it look like it's not all battle games. What does that mean when you say you don't want it to look like?
So you mentioned that the game is focused, that you believe right now that the game is focused around full class, correct?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay. So the idea was we want the rulebook, when someone opens the rulebook as a new player and they're reading through, they get the impression that full class is one part of the game and that tournament play is another type, like another aspect of the game, and that you have crafting and then you have government and then you have organization and logistics and all that of like running the games, and that those are all things that you can play. Will we have like, here's the way you do a tournament in Amtgard? Is that what you're asking?
I think Gorvan had something to say on this.
Yeah, I think the presentation of the different assets of Amtgard would be a bit more egalitarian. I think there's going to be a bit more page space dedicated to non-battle gaming sections of the game. Like, for example, right now there's, I think, all of a page on role playing and a page for quest abilities, things like that, where I think that there's just pages and pages and pages and pages for ability descriptions. I think that while the reason we have so much page space dedicated to the abilities is because it's the thing that requires the most explaining, because it's the thing that is least like our world, and you can't just be like, you know how blank works, you don't have to explain that. Whereas you do have to explain how a fireball works, because that's not a thing that exists. I think that the presentation of the rulebook can go a lot farther in playing up the non-battle gaming aspects and emphasizing that they are just as equally a part of the Amperard experience.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Deli. I have a question from Paige Guinevere. She's inquiring, are you guys going to be looking at things like such as allowing 3D printed arrowhead bases? I know that's been a very big topic of conversation up here with some of our parks.
So the discussion about arrow construction is an interesting one, because the arguments for making safe and efficient arrowheads also conflicts with the financial cost and the actual accessibility of archery in the game. So it's is there discussion about 3D printed stuff? Yes. Some of the common issues coming up are things like the quality of materials being used, the actual molds being used, right? Would we have to have these are AmpGuard approved, arrowhead designs that you can print, and this is the material that you must use, right? And if they do use that, how do you check? How do you confirm that? You have to go on faith. Do you cut open an arrow? There's been some people who've suggested arrow safety is a big enough issue that if you go to a kingdom level event, or let's say once every 3 months, whoever's doing weapon checks can literally cut open one of your arrows at random, like destructive testing, to be like, hey, I want to confirm that this is in fact what you say it is. And I know a ton of people are immediately like clutching their quiver, being like, no, right? Because arrows are expensive too. So I can't give you an answer right now, but I can say that there is a lot of discussion happening on how can we find the happy medium that allows arrows to still be accessible. Because like, if you join the game, you want to be an 3D printer, can you make arrows? Or do we say, nope, 3D printing or purchased only, right? That's the tricky part. I don't think I can really talk more about it without getting into hypotheticals. Does that kind of answer the question, though? Does that give you some insight?
Probably.
I believe it did, and it gave me some insight, because I know myself, I'm an archer. That's my base class, and my husband and I have just made our arrows, and we're actually have been toying around with a little idea with doing 3D printed stuff to make them safer, etc., and build them faster. So, answered. I don't know. Did you have anything on that, Rollo, or anything else? Okay, he's shaking his head no. That would be my husband. All right, next up, then, a question from Zarktooth. Will there be streamlined set of monster changes from the current rule set?
I can build this. If either of you want to jump in, yeah, just say so, and then I'll shut up.
Yeah, so we've got a really active monster focus group that's going on from one of our more recent surveys. And this is actually something that they've been talking about a lot, is how to frame monsters. Because in AmpGuard V8, of course, we have the Dor-Un Avatar and all kinds of other expansion books. And a feeling that some folks get is that those are considered less official and not part of the core rules. And that leads to things potentially like, oh, you can't play this monster, it's from this AmpGuard fanfic book. So there is definitely some element that wants to incorporate them more into the main rules of play, so that there's some monsters that, like, even if we make more expansion books later, they can say, well, these ones are in the rules of play. We can always play those. And a lot of discussion about how the class will look. So it's definitely being discussed. I wouldn't say we have a final vision of it, but I think there's definitely a drive to do something like that.
Does that answer your question?
I believe it does. I mean, it seems like the concept is just kind of too far out to really truly map out. So it's best I can hope.
Yeah, I think
like.
But
Go ahead, Gorgon.
I would just say I think the monster rules in particular, I think, are one of the focus groups that have the most consensus on we need to do something, and the least consensus on what do we do about it, except maybe like armor. And so I think that there are a lot of different possible solutions that are being discussed. Well, I mean, that goes for everything, obviously, but Monster in particular has a lot of like sliding scales of do we have monster rules in the rules of play? Do we have the V9 team write the Dorun Avatar? Do we have a Dorun Avatar? What do we do about how do we handle people wanting to write their own monsters? Like, there are so many different variables in play that I think that the main idea is we want to accommodate all the very, very different ways that people play Monster. And in order to do that, the rule set is going to have to be very flexible. And so the flexible rule sets are the hardest to design because you have to account for so many different possibilities.
We also have the interesting issue with monsters where what a monster is actually very regionally dependent. There are some places in the game that don't do any sort of real role play or like questing. And to the point where I'm saying this now, I don't know if you guys do questing or if you even call it questing, because there are some places that apparently call it guided adventures. And in places that don't do questing or these types of like, you know, PvE essentially games, monsters are looked at purely through the lens of battle game, or at most a scenario where it's still two teams and maybe some have a monster or there's a neutral monster in the middle that's doing something. But anyone who plays adventures and quests where you're out in a forest and you're playing multiple hours of, you know, the storyline thing, monsters are a whole different animal, right? But they right now in V8 are being pulled from the exact same source of rules, and that creates some conflict between battle game balance and roleplay balance.
And we do a lot of questing up here. I think Astro Winds tends to do a little bit more, actually incorporate monsters into their battle games, when the other parks tend to save their monsters for questing here. So, yeah.
So I will like to point out that Cord has joined us. He is another member of the V9 team. Cord, would you like to give a little intro for yourself and explain how you got onto the team? You are muted.
Apparently like double muted. All right. So I'm Cord. I'm from the Iron Mountains. I've been playing Amtgard for, let's see, I think I'm at 26 years now. And have played in 3 or 4 different kingdoms. I am a Crown and Flame Knight out of the IM. The reason I'm actually on the committee is I was one of the writers of the V8 rules. And when we started hearing some rumblings about teams wanting to, you know, or people wanting to see a new version of the rules or see rules changes and whatnot, I actually had put together my own side group to start kind of researching and looking into the concept. And then found out that there was another team already in place that was also doing that same thing. And so we basically just kind of combined the two teams together. And that's the current V9 committee that we've got.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. If it's really late, I apologize.
Oh, no, I'm in Denver, so it's actually not that bad for me. just a couple things that I wanted to actually comment on with regard to monsters. So monsters are a really challenging point for us in terms of the rules, because one of the big things and one of the main reasons why we actually have been writing new rule sets and whatnot is primarily consistency. We want to make sure that anybody can travel from like Astral Winds down to Falling Fire and Neverwinter, and at least for the vast majority of it, be playing the same game, okay, or at least be able to translate with minimal regional differences. And monsters are one of those where you just see a dramatic amount of difference, not just in whether monsters get played in a battle game or whether they're only for quests, or if people can use them randomly, or if it requires the rules or the game runner to actually determine whether the monster's eligible. There's a lot of variation there. There's also a lot less knowledge of what the monsters themselves actually do. Whereas I, as a player, could potentially be at least passingly familiar with the abilities of the classes that I fight against on a week-by-week basis. A random monster that comes up can really throw a wrench in the works for the game designer, for other players not really knowing what's going on. And so there's a lot of challenge associated with that. Getting those into the main rules would help address a lot of those. But on the other hand, monsters are so varied that doing that could potentially blow up our rulebook to 300 to 400 pages, and nobody's going to want to print that out. I mean, nobody prints it out anymore. Most people have it on their phone or on a tablet anyway, but you get the idea. Nobody's going to want to have to read through all of that within a base book. Okay, so we're trying to kind of balance that need for consistency with that need for brevity in how we actually do this.
And I want to address what Runehard posted in the chat. Will there be access to be able to listen in on the monster debates or recordings of them? At this current time, the focus groups are closed, and everything is done basically in chat, in text form. So no, we do not have any intent to release any of that to the public or any way to listen in if you are not part of it. The conversation is so swirling right now that it's I see the appeal of just being able to look in and watch, but you would probably be pulling out your hair, because it's like one idea is suggested. It's like solar flares. It'll be like, here's a crazy idea, and people blow up about it for a bit, and then it goes away to be completely forgotten, and then another idea. So it's literally, I'm calling it, an idea soup. Because the focus groups they're not, at the end of the day, the decision-making force. They are there to act as like a think tank, as perspectives, as just a general broad reach of all the different opinions and ideas across the game. So we want them to come up with all sorts of crazy ideas. We want them to discuss all sorts of crazy stuff, so that we, as the actual V9 developers, can look at this and throw ideas to them, be like, how does this work? Like making a soup, right? Throwing a carrot, be like, how does that work? Oh, it made it worse. Okay, take out carrots, right? Try to taste it, season it, and work with it like that.
As a side note there, your rules rep is also in all the focus groups by virtue of being a rules rep. So if you have something you want to make sure is brought to the focus groups, talk to your rules rep.
And for those of you who are not aware, Deli is our current rules rep.
And I guess here's a good place to mention, if you have applied for a focus group and have not, and are wondering if you were invited, please check your email, whatever you would have applied with, whatever email, for an invitation from v9@ampguard.com. We've had a lot of issues with them getting just sent to people's junk mails. And I believe Deli should have a list of anyone who was invited but hasn't joined yet. Deli, if you don't have that list, let me know and we can make sure you get it. But I believe Watt went out to all the rules reps and provided that list.
I don't think I have that list.
Okay. Send me a PM and I'll get that to you afterwards.
Okie dokie. So I'm going to jump just a little bit, because Zark2 said it just mentioned, so it sounds like there might be a need for a monster compendium post-rule set, question mark.
This
So-
kind of goes back to the whole idea of the Dungeon Master Guide supporting book, where it currently looks like suggestions and data is pointing towards at least some part of it being in a supportive book for quest runners to be like, hey, how do you build monsters for quests? And that will cover that side of things. Because generally most people running quests build their own monsters for the situation. As far as battle game monsters, Cord, do you want to touch on that?
What I was going to say about the monster compendium is, so again, I think this was actually mentioned earlier, but I was coming right on at this point, so I don't know if I heard it properly. But one of the issues with stuff like that is the officialness of the text. So I believe Heron was actually mentioning about like the Doran Avatar and the fact that it's only like it's kind of accepted and kind of official, but not really. And people will take ideas out of the Doran Avatar and then just make their own monsters and whatnot instead of actually following the official text. The way the door actually came about was we didn't want to incorporate monsters into the V8 rules for, kind of the bloat reasons that I had initially mentioned. And so the Amtgard X group basically kind of took it upon themselves to build it. And they brought it to the Circle of Monarchs, and the Circle of Monarchs gave it the rubber stamp. Now, the problem is the Circle of Monarchs just gave it the rubber stamp by saying, oh, this is the door? Okay. And no one had actually looked at it. So it doesn't go through the same degree of vetting or the same degree of play testing or anything like that the official rules do. And attempting to incorporate an outside compendium or something like that into the rules, we'd want to go through the same sort of official process where we actually have significant vetting and play testing and whatnot for that. And that would be an extensive process. And so it makes it a little bit challenging to be able to do something of that scale for monsters in an official capacity. Does that make sense?
We will be looking into ways to address this as we go forward, because it does have an impact. Monster is a class that people want to play and people have invested in, and if there's one thing we've got out of these surveys, it's that people don't want to have the stuff they've invested in taken away from them. So yeah.
Looks like, sorry, Doug, I keep interrupting you.
Yeah, Grok up higher. It's getting drowned out.
Yeah, I was just,
Question for him.
I was
he's
just,
asking if there's a timeline for when a playtest version will come out. I know you guys said 2024 for when you wanted a vote. Is that correct? From the
Yes, we have it on ampguard.com/v9 has a bunch of information, including a full FAQ, and on there is our timeline. Our current timeline is being somewhat affected by COVID, but so far we feel we're still on track. Essentially at GOTC, the IKCOM meeting this year, we are going to present kind of our findings from our year of doing surveys, and we are going to put forward a better idea or more concrete direction of where we're going to be going. We're going to redo our design goals, a lot of our policies, a lot of our ideas based on what we've gathered. And currently the idea was to ask for what I've been calling pocket playtesting, which was the idea to put out small little bits of fundamental rules or ideas to be playtested within V8, because we can't really build a system. Let's say we're going to be changing something about armor or the core mechanics of fighting. We can't really start building a system if we don't know which of those we're going to work with. So the idea was, hey, let's test out some of those things in V8 to see how they actually work, and before we start building on them. The problem is COVID exists, So we don't feel we have a big enough sample size right now, even if we did allow playtesting for the people who are fielding. So that is going to be pushed back. But our current date for a full, hey guys, here is V9 playtest, we were going to ask for that. I think a potential alpha at next year's GOTC, so 2022, July 2022, would be an alpha version of the game, which in theory, we wouldn't either. We would say, hey, this is the version everyone played if you want, and it's, give us your feedback, or we would ask it to be kind of limited to certain areas, to maybe certain events, certain parks, while we still work out major kinks. Depends on how confident we are with the build when we first put it together and GOTC comes around. Currently, the plan is alpha build for a year, beta build for a year, vote in, and now it's good. And then, support it once it's live. You can see it there. Deli just posted it in the chat.
Grok's second
Okay.
question was, is it possible to have any more transparency with some of these issues, allowing people to watch meetings, read forums, discussions without allowing people to post?
So basically, the idea we have behind having the rules reps in each of the focus groups is that that's kind of a way for them to communicate what's happening with the process without necessarily opening them up completely, because one of the really big risks to having every person able to view the focus groups at any time is kind of what Munja was talking about at the beginning of this, where somebody might take an idea that's being discussed heavily in the focus group, and they'll say, oh, this is what they're planning for V9, and then that gets sent around, and suddenly everybody thinks, oh gosh, armor breaking is going to do 4 points of damage in V9, when that's like 6 telephone exchanges away from what might have happened in the V9 group. So it is a little bit of a burden on the rules reps, but probably the best way you can get an idea of what's going on is through them.
You just chugged a whole bottle of
Okay, so sorry about that. Jojo asked, and I might end up, I think I understand what she's trying to ask. She said, would it be possible to have a group of people who really enjoy archery, or all the archers we have, get together and see if everyone can just make their arrows the same and use the same material? So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jojo, you're wanting to know if we could possibly standardize arrowheads. And so, because I know I've seen my arrowheads are different from another player's, whose are different from another player's, who are different from another player's.
Yes, you are correct. I was just saying, would it be easier to, everybody that enjoy that, just have everybody just make them the same way, use the same arrowhead, same material, like foam and everything, so that kind of takes out the whole whether someone has, was using different foam or harder foam or whatnot, to make it a little bit easier. I know everybody can jazz it up and make it look like their arrows, so we can make differentiate between which arrows it belongs to who, but the breakdown of all the arrows should all be the same, same material set, the way they're made and everything like that, if that's making sense.
The issue with that, and this has been discussed, and it kind of goes back to what I mentioned before, is availability of materials and skill of the crafter. If we do a standard, the standard would have to be set at the lowest acceptable, accessible point. So, do you want 3D printed arrowheads? A standard probably wouldn't have that. You wouldn't be allowed to 3D print arrowheads because not everyone has access to a 3D printer nor the proper 3D printing material. Even just as much as foam, you take a regular short sword, you go all across Amtgard, the foam that it's being built out of is going to be completely different. And the availability of said foam is either going to be regionally based on whatever hardware store, whatever provider is around, or we run the risk of creating this reliance on Amtgard suppliers and distributors where you then have this weird feature where you have people who can lobby for what the standard is and then build a business around it. Like, I live in an area where I can get this foam really cheap. I want to start a store that sells this foam. I'm going to try to get this foam become the standard. So I can then sell the foam to people who must use this foam if they want to play Archer. So there's a lot of issues, and it's also who approves it, right? Is there a council? Right? You just look at modern day politics. You end up running into a lot of conflict of interest issues when it comes to trying to make an exact set standard. And that is one of the main hurdles that stopped us, or that has been stopping a lot of the conversation in regards to a universal standard for arrows in the current weapon construction discussions about that. Anyone else note any other things in that regard?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we really need to be careful about with regard to any sort of weapon construction or anything like that is setting a particular standard or requirement and saying that everything has to adhere to that specifically. Because, I mean, we're writing rules that are probably going to be really slow to change just because that's the nature of our game. Okay, change doesn't happen quickly here. And so if technology evolves and people want to start using better materials like 3D printed materials or something like that, the game is going to be really slow to adapt to allow that to happen. We want people to be able to innovate and come up with new concepts and new things and improve safety and improve efficiency. And we don't want the rules potentially hindering that process. So the thought behind it is what we normally will do is define a bare minimum. Okay, here's the minimum that your tech has to actually meet in order to be viable for our game. If your tech goes beyond that in safety, efficiency, whatever, more power to you. We really want to encourage that, and I'd be afraid that if we applied a standard like that, it would potentially end up having a negative effect. Does that make sense?
Give me an idea. We should have a whole award track that's just dedicated to making safe and comfy arrows, like Order of the Pillowsmith. Just like,
I like to call those owls.
no, but owls is pretty stuff. I want stuff that's like a joy to be hit with.
No, dragons is pretty stuff.
I like it.
Side note on
We're
this.
gonna make a
we have
separate
nothing to do
one
with
that
award
is only for
standardization.
making
Yeah.
pillows.
Side note on this: award standardization is not in our domain. That is being handled by the awards team. So anything we say about awards, especially, is not.
Yeah, actually, now's a good time. I'll riff off that and say, for anyone who's wondering, we have no authority over award standards, COC, knighthood stuff. I believe Kingdom, like sponsorship, park sponsorship, and I think that's pretty much it. I think those are the main ones that we're not going to touch. Technically, I think we can touch a little bit on like the government-based description rules, but I don't think we really have a reason to want to do that right now because they're mostly governed by Kingdom Corporas, but I don't think it's outside of our range if we wanted to tweak something. All monarchs must wear fezzes.
No. No.
Sneak that in there.
I'm still going to say no. All right. Adge asked, are there any classes that have a lower level of play looking at potential buffs to their kit?
When you say lower level of play, do you mean classes that not play this frequently?
That was what it sounds like to me.
So right now, we have not done a proper class survey yet. We have basically been surveying from the fundamentals upward in complexity from there. And classes are very much the accumulation of the rules, right? That's where the most rules funnel into how a class works. So we are going to kind of get our direction set a little bit more for the general rules of the game. And then we're going to put together a class survey that will get us the information we want as it pertains to how we want to build the rules. I know that seems really vague and nebulous. That survey will ask, will get us the numbers for, you know, which classes are being played, which classes are not being played. Tier lists, what people think are strong, what people think are weak. We have not done that yet. We have not collected that yet. That will be done after this year's GOTC. That is our current plan for when the class surveys will be done. We specifically want to wait to see what happens this year in regards to Paladin and Anti-Paladin, because that is being handled by the V8 rules team. And that will obviously affect our survey for classes.
All right, back to monsters. Jojo asked, how many different monster classes are out there currently? And can we just cut some out and keep easy ones, or the ones that people are most familiar with? And I think there's like an infinite number of monster classes out there, in my opinion.
Monsters.
7?
I counted them. Yeah, 7.
Just 7.
Yeah, 7. Next question.
So as far as the numbers, I haven't really looked at the door in a while, but I think I thought the number was somewhere in the range of 40 there. Sorry, go ahead.
Classes there were. So I said in my defense, because he's like 7. Next question. I was like, I didn't know how many monsters classes were, so sorry, I didn't count. So I would have X-ate that. But also brings me back to, since we do have these monsters and we have this kind of like, you know, there's 7 and everything. I know we can't X-nay them out or anything, but is there a way that if people want to get involved with more with monsters class, we can make it simpler for them? Like, you know how they have like plumbing for dummies? Can we do like monsters for, like, you know, people that's having like a harder time understanding that, and that way it would kind of make it a little bit easier, I guess?
So yeah, so one thing we can touch on is one of our design principles, which is we want to kind of keep complexity focused internally rather than externally. And what that means is when someone walks on the field, if they have some sort of complex interaction or ability or rule, that the bulk of that understanding is on them. And for you experiencing it, it should all play within the realms of expected common knowledge. So for example, a good example in modern Amtgard would be something like Elemental Barrage. So that's an ability that lets a wizard cast their spell balls just by saying the name and throwing it. And then they have limitations where it's like, oh, if they cast a spell or they pick up a thing, it gets rid of Elemental Barrage. Sometimes they can recharge it if they have Evoker. Sometimes they can't, etc., etc. They have so many uses. But for the person receiving it, they just need to know what the spell balls do, right? And that's it. And maybe they need to know there's a thing that lets the wizard cast the spell balls faster, right? They don't need to know how Elemental Barrage works. And monsters, especially with how Core mentioned that the door was kind of sort of a side slide in to V8, there's a lot of rules that only exist in the door that some players, if you're just a regular player, don't know. You show up, person's like, hey, what are you playing? I'm playing a fairy. Cool. And you try to fight them like, nah, I'm flying. You can only shoot projectiles at. Okay, I throw a throwy. Okay, you're armed. No, I'm small, so I don't take damage from like limb shots or whatever. So I think that is what you're getting at, right? That kind of weird complexity where a new player walks in and there's like a whole other set of rules that they need to learn just for monster.
Yes, absolutely. That was what I was getting at.
Yeah, so our monster survey results have strongly suggested that most players want the monster rules, whatever they end up being, to be synergistic with the actual core rules. So they're not going to have their own special monster abilities. There will be maybe monsters, but they're still going to play with the same rules and abilities that all the other classes that another player would be familiar with. So if you see a harpy on the field, it's going to be using stuff that you're familiar with and that you've seen somewhere else, just maybe in a different combination.
Good question, Jojo. Thank you. Next question I have on my list is, what is each team member most excited about for the changes to V9 and most concerned about regarding the change to V9?
Most concerned about, I want it to be good.
You want me to start since everyone seems to be in thought?
Yeah,
All right. So what was it? It was what we're concerned about and
Most excited and most concerned.
So most excited, I'm gonna say the fact that we are giving this development process its due diligence. I'm actually excited to see what we can do and what we can make now that we are like really giving it 110%. We are getting people involved. We have some really, really smart people contributing to this project on the development side, on the focus group side, behind the scenes everywhere. We are giving this time to marinate. And, I hope that we end up with a very juicy V9, very tender and delicious V9 at the end. So that's what I'm excited for. What I'm most worried about? Is that what I'm most worried about?
Most concerned, yes.
Concern? My biggest concern is going to be we want to keep the interests of both veteran and new players in mind. However, as we go, I have come to learn that there is a lot of spectrums in Amtgard, and there are people on both ends and all over the place. And we're gonna probably lose people in the transition who are sitting at those extremes. There are gonna be people that when V9 drops, they're gonna be like, this is not the game that I thought it was. They're just like people left in V8, just like people left in every other edition change. There's gonna be people that, for whatever reason, the thing we cut for the greater good of the system, for in the interest of everyone else, that thing we cut was the thing that they cared about most, and they're gonna leave, and that sucks, knowing that it's probably unavoidable. But I would be lying if I said this is gonna be perfect and everyone's gonna be happy at the end of it. And we're gonna please everyone. So my biggest concern is that we do best by our people as best as we can, so that even if people do have that knee-jerk, that they find something that makes them want to stay, and that they see, hey, this really was for the better. This made things better. I do want to stay. I mean, my whole Amtgard experience is not defined by one rule in the game. It means more to me than this one change. And so my concern is making sure that that is met. If that counts. Next, who's up?
I guess the thing that I can honestly say that I'm most excited for is when we do eventually start getting into tweaking and balancing and designing the classes, because that's my favorite part of Amtgard is class gaming, and I'm really excited to get into the game design and balance aspect of things because I get really excited about that. But that does relate a little bit to the thing that kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety about the future of V9 development, is that anytime you change something, especially something that people are so invested in, is like their class in Amtgard, because the class is something that most people is like the core of their identity in Amtgard is like, I'm a scout player or I'm a wizard. And when we change things, no matter which direction we change things, there are going to be people who are upset by that. There are going to be people who feel like their class isn't their class anymore and they may have to find a different one. And people can be kind of mean on the internet, so I'm kind of not looking forward to that aspect. We'll see how it goes.
I think Gorvin, you were trying to speak earlier, and I think you got cut out.
I was just joking about the thing I'm worried about is I want to make sure it's good. No, I think like when you said, I'm really intrigued by the process we're going through and the idea that this is the most data-driven design process we've had, and I'm really interested in seeing how how much it affects people's enjoyment of the game, knowing that they had more of a say in how it happened. And I'm excited because I think we've got a very strong, we've got a strong team, and also the support system we've built around this team is great because of the focus groups, the rules reps, the different teams that have been built to make sure that as many aspects of the game we can cover are covered. I think we've got a really great setup. I'm really excited to see the process through. In terms of concerns, like I said, I want to be good. I want people to enjoy the game, and I think we've had a lot of conversations on the team about imposter syndrome and feeling like, why am I here? Like, why is it me doing this? I think that, especially because I'm one of the newer players on the team. I didn't play V7. I didn't play V6. I didn't play all these other editions that people have that inform people's viewpoints, and so trying to build off of the legacy of all the previous rule sets is harder for me because I don't know them, and so I want to make sure that I'm doing justice to the line of Amtgard rule sets.
I would say the thing that I'm most excited about with V9 is the opportunity to fix a bunch of the things that we screwed up in V8. So I will say, I thought V8 was a really solid system. Moving from V7 to V8, I personally, and I'm biased because I was one of the writers, but I feel like it was a vast improvement, both, from a game balance perspective, from a fun perspective, from, trying to bring Amtgard, more into meshing with modern gaming design concepts, etc. But there were a couple of things that we just royally screwed up. I don't want to get into too much specifics there because I can kind of rant about them, because every single time I find one of those, it's like a punch in the gut, because it's like, really? How did we miss that? So I'm really looking forward to being able to fix a bunch of those that we've identified. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and what I'm excited about. What I'm concerned about, I gotta say, the least fun aspect of a process like this is kind of one of the things that everybody else has hinted to, is just the feedback process, and the fact that the feedback process is, especially in Amtgard, unfortunately, not done in a congenial manner. Like the amount of vitriol that I got from the V8 process was, if I wasn't incredibly stubborn, would have been enough to drive people, or like somebody else out of the game potentially. I'm really hoping that this time it's not quite as acidic. And I think Amtgard has grown a lot since then, and now is policing things a little better. So I really hope that's not the case. But I do have some trepidation about that, just because I don't really want to go through that process again.
All right, thank you guys. I know it has now been an hour, so it is just after 8 o'clock our time. I know some of you are up past your bedtimes, I'm sure. I want to probably wrap this up here shortly, but of course I would not be a proper queen of my kingdom if I did not ask, do you guys think is Mayo an instrument?
Would you believe this isn't the first time we've gotten this question?
I'm not
actually
surprised.
going to be the new class that we're adding. We've considered whether to add cleric or mayo, and we decided mayonnaise is a better class for the game.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, oh, go ahead.
There's that old requirement for bards to carry an instrument, and we've decided to bring that back, and mayonnaise will count.
I'm also really looking forward to the archetypes for Mayo. We're going to have Miracle Whip. We're going to have Hellmans. It's going to be great.
I'm personally a fan of horseradish mayonnaise.
You really
And then we get into all of like the ketchup mayo combos. Yeah, we could cross class.
Oh, yeah.
Well.
Garlic mayo.
Wow.
I am in so much trouble because do you got was it one of my COC meetings, or I think it was during one of my and COC for us is our Council of Crowns. They went into we had a town hall, and they went into a dissertation on how mayo was an instrument. They demonstrated it, and then went into different forms like the pudding, etc. So we'll be so happy to hear this.
Great.
I guess how everyone else guys in my team, how long are you guys available for? Because I'm good to keep going for a bit.
I've
when
probably
you
got
guys
another
need to-
20 minutes.
Yeah, about that. 15,
All right.
20 maybe.
Yeah,
You
probably.
guys want to go for another 30 minutes then? 30, 20 minutes, go to whatever 30.
I'll probably have
Asking-
to take off a little bit before that, but I'd be down.
All right, how about another 15 minutes then?
Yeah, oh yeah, if you guys want to close it down, by all means. I was just making sure that you're not closing on behalf of us.
I wasn't trying to close it, but I mean, I guess like I know you guys are doing us a great favor being out here because the East Coast Alaska time zone difference is just horrid. So,
Midnight right now for me.
all right, guys, this is your last chance then to get any of your last-minute burning desire questions. Dolly wants a Ninja Turtle class as well, apparently.
Did we get all the questions that were in chat? By the way?
I did scroll through. I did not find any other ones that were actually, because some of them got repeated. Let me pick those up.
I got another one. I could just keep asking questions.
Go for it, Deli.
Yeah, sure.
Have you guys looked at like outside of Amtgard, like I don't know, video games or like Wizards of the Coast, or like how other professional companies with a bunch of money have decided to update their rule set or game design or anything like that?
Yes.
The
Sorry, go ahead.
interesting part is actually finding examples that are similar to Amtgard to draw from, because a lot of video games, a lot of their development and updates comes from, hey, we've got a constantly accurate database of what is being done at all times, because it's running through our servers. So something like League of Legends, which is probably one of the closer anecdotes to what Amtgard is done it's all AI controlled, it's all AI databases, computer stuff, which really distances itself from any useful information for us. And then you have Magic the Gathering, and you've got like D&D, and you've got all those kind of things, and you run into the issue mostly of it being turn-based, or it having a completely different way that it is played, so the processing is different. One thing I have to tell our focus groups a lot, especially when they're drawing comparisons to either video games or D&D, is that Amtgard is a very unique thing. It is a first-person, real-time game with a decentralized processing system. Every individual player is observing the game in real time from their own eyes and senses, and then determining what they believe is happening. And what an Amtgard game is the consensus of all those desynchronized brains. There is no AI running in the background making sure that if I throw a fireball at a warrior in the middle of a melee, that fireball will do its thing. It is the game only works as much as the collective brain power and observations makes it happen. And so it's really interesting trying to figure out how to take information from other design principles and apply it to this, where we can't just be like, well, we'll tweak this number up by 1 and everything will proliferate via the AI or the system, because that's not how it works.
It's very much harder to make changes like, oh, well, Ice Ball will last 35 seconds, but Entangle will last 25, because the more things that we have to keep track of, the harder it is for people. We can't do it automatically.
Not to mention making a change and people either not realizing there was a change or forgetting which version of the rules they're in.
Yeah, I'll bring up my bees thing again, which is basically if you take a bee's nest and you move it like 10 feet to the left, the bees will not recognize that nest is not their nest, and they may attack that nest thinking it is a different bee's nest, like intruding on their territory. But if you take that same bee's nest, move it across the ocean, and the bees somehow find that nest, they will recognize their nest and go into it. And when we're talking about rules changes, it means we essentially can't change something very little. Because if we change it too little, people won't notice something has changed, and they'll keep playing it the old way, because a lot of this game is taught through word of mouth. And that creates problems. There are still rules in V8 that are being played the V7 way because they weren't changed drastically enough for people to know. And so through word of mouth, through the veterans who teach the game, they just teach the V7 way because that's what they knew, and they don't reread the rules. They go, oh, how do wounds work? I know how wounds work. Don't tell me how wounds work. It's the same thing. You take an arm, but if a little change happened there, all of a sudden they're repeating the wrong thing.
I think the important point here is that it's not necessarily the mechanic needs to change. It could also be the presentation needs to change, or something else about it that needs to draw attention to the fact that this is a different thing. Look at it. This is different. Don't just think you know it.
Fast car.
All right, thank you. Nalarian, who was late to the ball game, has shot off a bunch of questions. The first one is, how do you guys envision the pace of the game? V7 was much slower than V8.
I can field that if no one else wants to. Okay. I personally have a desire, although we haven't really got much to this conversation yet. We're trying to see where the what's the phrase, where the stones lie, so to speak, before we go into it. But I would like to, I've been referring it to as like blunting the spear. I feel like Amtgard right now, it rewards alpha strikes a little too much, and YOLO plays and all or nothing, just blitz. You know, hey, you've got a bunch of enchantments. Hey, you've got a bunch of per refresh. Hey, you've got a bunch of stuff. Seize the day, seize the moment, all or nothing, go, win, wreck the team. There's no reason for a tactical retreat. Tactical retreats, a lot of the time, will only hinder you if you just want to go, because not only do you benefit from the momentum of that surge, but unfortunately, V8 has a lot of rules that have no punishment for breaking them. Declaring enchantments, having the proper enchantment strips, things like that. Armor, how much armor you have left, ancestral, surprise, the whole enchantment system, basically. So by that all accumulates in a play where, hey, I'm going to take advantage of the opponent not having any idea what's going on. And that creates this situation where aggro, super fast, super take advantage is benefiting. So I would like to, I don't want to say that slowing it down, but I would like personally to see there be more value in, let's say, tactical retreating, gain some ground and then pull back, right? The hard part is obviously how do you build that, and that's something we're going to have to cross or consider, but that's kind of where I feel, so take that as you will. Cord, you look like you have something.
So I disagree with a little bit of that, and I think part of that is that I think V8 was built in such a way that it actually allows for different speeds of play. I will definitely agree that by and large it was a significant speed up from V7, but that's because V7 was incredibly slow. But it should be able to manage different speeds of play. I think what we see though is we didn't provide enough guidance on how games should be built so that that variability is there. I think what we primarily see in V8 is that type of speed game because that's what people have started building and that's just kind of what's gone on. And there are definitely rules that facilitate that type of speed game, just like there are rules that would be better associated with the slower pace of play. So I don't necessarily agree that V8 has, just this constant go, go, go requirement to it. I just think that's more something that's been created by how people are implementing it. And I think another way that we could address that is largely with guidance on how to actually build games with particular tempos and whatnot so that people have a clearer idea of the available options rather than just the go, 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 go kind of play style.
Yeah. Removing lives, I think, was a big one because people got into using these like infinite lives, infinite touch the base respawn or rally respawn or fast respawns. And that's, exactly. That's kind of contributed to a perceived increase in speed because people are willing to just throw themselves away rather than trying to ration.
I think there are aspects of the rules that people kind of just ignore with regard to how designing those types of games. I mean, the rulebook specifically says that death should be the worst thing that could happen to a player. And yet everybody just kind of ignores that because right now, Ice Ball is the worst thing that can happen to a player, or CC is the worst thing that can happen to a player. And death is a mild inconvenience that's probably a lot better to take than having to actually deal with the spells. So, I definitely think there are things sorry, go ahead.
Which is, again, a really regional thing, because there are some places that I've traveled to where they do the instant spawns, and some kingdoms where 60 seconds is pretty standard. So you get a lot of perspectives on that.
Even just the difference between where your death count starts, right? Like in the Nine Blades, we have death counts start on death, so that if you're an archer, you're not penalized for going around picking up your arrows. But there are definitely other places where it's like death count starts when you get back to your base. If you're good, you'll run back, and your death count is affected directly by your cardio and how much you've trained to sprint to your base.
Sorry, what had you been saying, Cord? I kind of interrupted there.
No, you're fine. Actually, I don't remember exactly what that thought was.
You were talking about the pace of games and how they could be presented in the rulebook to promote a slower pace of play sometimes.
Yeah, but I feel like I made the point on that. I think I was about to tangent, so we're good.
Oh, okay, cool. The system works.
I don't remember what I mentioned.
Excellent. All right. Next question. Have you considered drop discrete classes and go for a quote build your own class end quote type of structure?
Considered, I think might be a slightly strong word, but it's definitely a thing that has come up. I think part of the thing I was saying earlier about what I'm concerned about being following the footsteps of previous editions is that there's a very strong identity of what Amtgard is, and part of that is classes. The data so far that we've gotten on class structure tends to point towards people feeling like Amtgard has classes, that's what the game is. That being said, there's also data that points towards the boundaries between the classes being less defined. Things like archetypes, things like customization, things like do we want point buy, pick X, whatever it is. And so I think that while there will probably, again, the hedging of based on data, be more customization, I would be surprised if V9 has no classes and it's just like a skill tree.
Just to add to that, when I was talking about the different spectrums in Amtgard and different personalities, on one side we have the people who want the like crazy D&D levels of customization and granular minutia where they can change and min-max all these different things for fun or for power, right? But on the other side, there is still a strong amount of players who want something more akin to like you're playing Overwatch or you're playing any sort of, Team Fortress where you basically have no choices, right? They just want, what's your class? This is what I get. Cool, thanks. Let's go play, right? There are people that want that choices can be a negative experience to them. So we want to make sure that whatever we build, it can appease the people who want choices and also appease the people who want less choices. Now, does that mean we just have some pre-builds, right, in the book and say, hey, this is what basic warrior looks like, and here's a warrior where you can customize a bit? Yeah, that might be a direction we take. But in terms of like build a class where it's just like here's the abilities and a system to mix and match, that's probably meter is vibrating over here on this side of the spectrum for catering to one group or the other.
Going towards Deli's question from earlier about looking at other systems, like that pre-build idea is fairly directly expired from the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook of here are a bunch of customization options, but if you want a quick build, here's the thing. Like that was the first time that I saw that in a rule book and was like, that's a great idea. We should do that. But of course, we just have to then go and take it to an Amp-Guard perspective and say, well, okay, what does that actually mean to have a pre-build for an Amp-Guard class? What does that mean depending on how customization works out? There's also the variables.
Cool to have, like, if we have pre-builds for every class, doing something where it's like, hey guys, we're playing pre-build day. You can only play the pre-build versions of the classes for a day.
It'll replace full class no magic as the most popular V8 playstyle.
We need to make one completely redundant game mode. What is this? This is in-character bowling, and everyone has special bowling abilities.
So one other thing I think to consider with regard to the idea of skill trees or just like a point-buy system or something like that is these types of systems work really well in a game where you have AI controlling things. Okay, but in a game where you've got interactions between people, it can make it significantly more difficult for people to recognize what's actually happening or to have any idea, what they're playing against. Additionally, it makes things incredibly difficult to balance. The greater the degree of variability that you have, the harder it's going to be for us to be able to kind of look at things objectively and say, this is balanced against this. It also makes it really easy to find those combinations, especially if we have a significant number of abilities, to find those combinations that are effectively, extremely overpowered on the field and are just going to be able to mow everybody else down. So, we really have to take into consideration what sort of impact a system like that would have on our ability to make the game fun and workable and well balanced for everybody involved.
Awesome. Noreen, I'm going to skip one of your questions because I want to hear the answer to this last one before we hopefully don't lose Heron here soon. Have you considered ways to address physical limitation issues and how to not make them as detrimental to players? I think posting versus taking a knee.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, one of the great things that actually passed last GOTC was an adaptation to the rules where if you get shoved while you're posting or whatever, you can, or rather, while you're legged, you can get up and do that movement. So they have made some adaptations even in the V8 rules. I would say that we are definitely looking at accessibility. It's one of, I forget where exactly in the hierarchy of really important things it is. But it's pretty high up there. We want to make sure that everybody's able to play the game without the same level of ableness being required. Definitely. Trying to find the exact wording of the question here. Have you considered ways to address physical limitations? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's something that's being discussed at some length in quite a few of our focus groups. A big one that's come up is the armor groups have obviously been having their discussions on the requirement to have steel armor as the standard. It's been coming up for discussion pretty much everywhere, so we're definitely thinking about it. We don't really have final rules yet, but it is a priority.
Yeah, safety, like I mentioned, safety is up here, and accessibility goes hand in hand with safety. I can't speak for everyone else on the team, but I personally feel that AmpGuard is a hobby first and foremost, not a competitive sport, and therefore we owe it to the players to make coming out and participating as accessible as possible at the baseline so that they can come out, play, and enjoy what they're doing. And then, at least excel to a reasonable degree before we start saying, okay, now you need to be training to be super good, right? There's always going to be that level of where does personal effort go into it, but we don't want, when possible, to limit people due to accessibility needs. Which actually, it brings up a really good thing of like just the idea of mentioning in the rule book that, hey, accessibility accommodations can be made. Going back to the spectrum, there are some people who can make obvious common sense decisions based on the rule book, and there are other people who feel like the rule book is the word, like is law and will be followed to a T. So if the rule book doesn't say, oh, you can make accommodations for a disabled player, they won't think that those are allowed. And that is definitely not what we want, right? We want AmpGuard to be like, hey, if someone shows up to your field and they want to play and they're, they have some sort of physical limitation or some sort of processing limitation, if the game runners there, the Reeves, the Monarchs, the players there are able to help them, tweak things so that they can play, right? And we're going to hopefully be able to provide guides somewhere that can help people make the right decisions, where you can provide an accommodation without making the game significantly different. Because I think that's another hurdle, is when you put responsibility on the game designers, just like passing off rules decisions to the Reeves, people have an idea of what the game designers and the Reeves should be, but that the actual standard of them is like down here right now, so they're not always equipped to properly deal with that. So hopefully potential DMGs or whatever supports we put in can help people make the proper decisions to build games, to make accommodations, and to generally fill in the blanks that the rules puts to them in the way that folks are hoping they make those decisions, and not in a way that is negatively impacting the players that it's supposed to help.
Another thing that we're looking to do from the accessibility perspective is we're gathering information on the surveys from people who are willing to provide us with information about what types of issues they actually encounter from an accessibility perspective. And we are actually reaching out to those people and doing kind of in-depth interviews to understand their perspective, what issues they encounter with the rules, what are things that we've never actually even identified that end up being a real problem for some of these people. And trying to really understand thoroughly where those problems occur, so that we can incorporate some way to address that within the rules. So if you or someone has some sort of accessibility issue with regard to the V8 rules at this point, please take the surveys and provide us that feedback. And if you're willing to talk to us about that, we can't get to everybody because we are doing in-depth interviews on these. So we're trying to get a wide enough breadth of issues and conditions so that we can understand, across the board. But if you do have people who'd be willing to speak to us about that, please have them fill out the survey and make mention that they'd be interested in speaking to us about that.
Awesome. All right, I have 2 more questions listed, and I know it is 8:26. Are you guys still good to go?
We can do a little bit longer.
Okay. Way to hang in there.
You can take off.
Awesome.
I'm good to finish up the list.
Perfect. Way to hang in there. I'm giving y'all props. Okay. How is armor shaping up in the newer rule set? Any direction you guys have settled on or aiming at? Thinking aesthetic versus realism issues. We're pretty focused toward realism right now for points, in my opinion, resulting in less awesome looking armor. Think beautiful leather armor.
There's a couple angles to look at it from. I think a lot of people want to see more armor, but there are a couple ways to do that. So that can come from the angle of class balance, like more classes should be able to wear armor, or it can come from the angle of accessibility, where we want people to be able to wear lighter armor and still be able to get the full value of their class. And people have different priorities because there are people who will say, well, foam armor looks great. We want to see it on our field. It's really attractive and draws people out. And there are also people who say, well, if you give a really, really good player armor that gets 6 points and weighs 1 pound, are they ever going to wear metal armor again? Metal armor is cool too. So there's a lot of factors to think into that. And I think everybody's in agreement that we want to see more armor, but the way that we do that without making anybody feel, or without making most people feel left out, that's a really hard question.
Yeah, I
That is
think one of-
probably the $1 million question in V9 development right now. Is probably how the hell do we handle armor without alienating someone?
And that's really one of the biggest challenges. Is you mention a kind of a specific perspective of aesthetics are a little bit more like something we need to go toward from the realism perspective here, and that's absolutely a perspective of a decent number of people in the game. On the other hand, we have pretty much a balanced set of like 5 or 6 different perspectives of how armor should go that are completely antithetical to one another. And so part of what we're going to have to do is figure out how to build armor in such a way that it addresses some of the concerns from all of those different perspectives in such a way that is balanced and actually usable in Amtgard. And that's a monumental task. Like the V8 rules for armor were an attempt to do that. And I think what it ended up resulting in was a set of armor rules that no one was quite happy with, but a bunch of people were willing to accept. And so, like, we'll have to see exactly, what options we have to try and make sure that we're still bringing everyone in and we're not specifically alienating, people with a very, very specific perspective.
So, oh man, I had a thing and then I wrote a joke in chat and it didn't, and then it left me. Oh, sorry, there we go. So with armor and the variety of opinions, we may be able to determine when we're building the rule set what we think the best version of armor would be. We can go and we go, hey, this is the piece that fits perfectly into this slot. But that making that piece might alienate a massive chunk of the population or render some of their efforts useless. And with that in mind, it is likely that there are going to be some big decisions in V9 that are only done halfway or done as a means to, I'm going to say, wean people in a certain direction. And then we're going to hope that when V10 comes around, people have acclimated to a certain way and are more willing to continue that transition. Something like,
say they want X, they experience it, and like, oh, maybe not.
Like, yeah, or the other way, right? And the idea is, when it comes to something like steel armor and heavy armor and encumbrance, meaning, your weight equals points. If we want to see how people would like without that, we can't just go, oh, here's a new rule where everyone can wear, ultralight armor, and there you go. And everyone who's wearing steel right now, sucks to be you, buy new stuff. We need to go a little bit, make both of them viable for V9 essentially. And then when we go to V10, whoever's doing V10 can go, hey, this is how they feel now, right? Most people have transitioned off to this or off to whatever. We need to realize that there are still people that are going to be coming from V8 with their V8 kits, and we don't want to force everyone to have to literally buy a whole new kit. And for some people who are like, oh, I own a metalworking shop, their argument is just they like making stuff out of steel. But for, some people who are like living paycheck to paycheck, who save up little bits and pieces to slowly build a metal kit, for us to now come out and go, hey, your whole suit of armor is now not only, inefficient, but, basically a waste of money, buy something new, that sucks. And that, that's not what we want to hit either. So I forget specifically why I brought that up, but it's the transition. Point is transition, slow.
I think you've explained this in another one, and where you went after it, that one. Basically, even if we do have a system where it's more accessible for people to make armor without having to live paycheck to paycheck and save up for it, like, it would be great if people didn't have to do that, but also it makes people feel really put out when they put in that effort, and then it doesn't mean anything. So we can't make people's kits feel worthless, is basically what it boils down to.
Yeah. So how do we make a system where everyone's current kits plus the potential solution kits feel good all together and not exclude each other?
All right, last question of the evening, and then we will call it a night. Speaking of knights, do you have any sword knight type representation?
Gosh. I have 5 orders of the warrior, I think.
The
representation in what sense? Do you mean on the actual V9 committee or within the focus groups?
Yeah, I was just curious, like, because you guys said on your committee, because you guys talked a lot about a lot of great stuff about like inclusion and involving people who are unable to have fun, but also like there's a large group of people who like hitting each other with foam swords, and in V9 they didn't have very much fun, and you saw like a large divide between the play group. And then in V8,
V8, they didn't have much fun.
No, in
V7,
V8
you
they
mean?
had. Sorry, V7 they didn't have much fun. V8 they had a lot more fun, because they felt like their skills meant something a lot more. So I was just curious if you had any sort of representation to involve and like make those people have more fun, or have a system that accommodates them, their desires, how they like to enjoy the game.
Gotcha. So none of us are sword knights. I will say that right up front. That
Or
being
just
said,
any classic stick jock, just throw them in there.
yeah. So I would classify myself in the stick jock category. Before getting old and arthritic, I was really pushing for sword knight. Not so much anymore because joints suck. But yeah, so I think we do have representation from that perspective on the committee, although not necessarily with the specific credentials of a sword knight. We also have plenty of feedback from the focus groups because we do have a lot of sword knights actually in a number of the focus groups. Yeah.
Awesome.
So we're hearing from them there as well.
Yeah, that was kind of our big thing with the focus group split. It let us make the core team. We wouldn't have to worry about bloating the core team, like what we are here, with a bunch of token representations where we can focus on the core team being filled with skilled developers, and then the people who had a specific perspective but might not be great developers can be there on the focus groups so they can talk about exactly what they're good at, and they don't have to worry about, you can have a sword knight talk our ear off about the sword knight perspective and the sword knight side of things. But if you sit them down and be like, okay guys, we're going to decide how to build healer or we're going to build wizard, they might just want to tune out if they don't even care about class battle games. So everyone on the core team is invested in making sure every aspect of Amtgard is equally considered, whereas the people on the focus groups are allowed to be like, you care about what you like best, and we'll come to you when we need to talk about that. So I think that's a really good spot for a lot of the Sword Knights to generally be, because a lot of the time they have to put in so much effort into becoming a Sword Knight that they're very much of a player mindset more than a developer mindset. I think I'm tangenting a little bit, but
Yeah, and that's not to say that we don't have Sword Knights in the focus groups who are kind of development minded and play a lot of battle games. It's just,
Yeah.
I guess not their primary role.
Yeah,
there's
like we have
people-
a ton of people who are good developers for sure in the focus groups.
When we go through it and figure out like the focus group list, there are people there that are like, they have their niche. They're gonna go real hard on that niche. Like there's a guy in there for like siege weapons. There's one person who's just like, I have this one specific idea for how monster is gonna work, or I have this one specific idea for how armor is gonna work, and they all want their thing represented. And if there's enough spread of views within a focus group, the conversations that they have back and forth going through their many different points of view on a topic, we read every single post, every single comment. There are thousands of comments each group by themselves, and all that data coming in is just extraordinarily useful to seeing how many like different ways that we could fix things, different ways that different viewpoints we wouldn't otherwise consider. And I think that's just such a benefit to the art design process. With that, I think I need to go to bed.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that would sound like the end of our discussion for this evening. I want to thank all of you for coming. This was a great discussion. I will get it posted here as soon as I get it uploaded to our channel. And maybe we can do it again in the future if you guys still have burning questions as we get closer to July. And I believe, Munjo, you're going to be hopefully posting the next survey here soon. It's around the time that you normally do that.
Yeah, I hold on, let me it might be up like tonight. I need to we're literally waiting on the AmpGuard's website guy to update our stuff before we make posts. So, yeah, probably be up like tomorrow for the next survey. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out to hang out with us, to chat with us. We really want to be doing more of these. We know you guys want to see, especially everyone else who is here, and less of me, because you guys, in theory, if you're looking at the monthly reports, see and hear from me quite often. But the rest of the team is great, and I hope you can see that we are all very independent thinkers, and I hope that kind of inspires a little bit more confidence in us that we are doing V9 good and that we're doing AmpGuard good by you guys. So yeah, thank you for inviting us. This is great. Thank you.